Finance always takes more than it gives. There's been a very concerning trend within our society stemming from the 1970s, which involved the smartest among us leaving to go and progress the industry of finance rather than helping the world or making progress through other means such as engineering, science, technology, or mathematics. I'm going to talk about that trend today, why it matters, why it's happening, and what this means for the future of America, potentially. So, cash is stealing our future. In essence, finance firms are targeting the most highly educated STEM students in our society. This is people typically with post-grad degrees that have been in school for a very long time and are very much devoted to science, technology, and mathematics, and engineers. These are basically our geniuses. And instead of actually producing and sticking to their field in the older age, in their prime years, they're now gravitating more towards finance. I'm going to start talking about that, why that's happening, why does this matter, what this means. First, I have a question. Have you been placing more emphasis on money rather than creating? That's my question, because in my own life, I definitely have. And it's not just a trend that we're seeing in a very small subset of our most highly educated. This has obviously been part of our greater society for a while. It's just probably not talked about as much. So that's my question. Answer below in the comments. Maybe this is something that other people feel. I'm not sure. But where are our best going? More and more of our highly educated STEM majors are migrating to finance. Why does this matter? This is going to be my hypothesis and the hypothesis that I read in the long-ass research paper I had to read for this video. Number one, my theory is less research and development. I think less and less people we're going to see less and less development within our society if we have less and less people working to make our society generally better, little by little. So if we have a lot of people working in finance rather than working in industries such as engineering, then our finance is going to be very, very highly developed. But then what happens to our greater economy if nothing new gets made, nothing innovative gets made within the space of, for example, like petroleum engineering? What if there's already a skills gap in that market. What if we completely stop making engineers and people who are highly skilled in that field for that market? Well, things obviously change. What changes exactly? A lot. People are overworked, and there are other people who just can't train others. We start falling behind other countries. And it's kind of like a trickle-down effect. If one of our major industries starts to crumble, such as manufacturing, which is also another one, it starts to go and affect the rest of our society as well at large. So, overworked leaders. I mentioned it a bit, but I think people are going to start to get more and more worked if there's less and less people to fill these jobs that are very highly reliant on very extensive education, very extensive experience, and very high-level post-grad degrees. Skill shortages. If there's no one that is willing to work in these fields, we're going to have no one developing our world, or more importantly, our future anymore, which is a huge, huge problem. Next, lower innovation. If there's no one developing, there's no one innovating. If we're not innovating, we're going to fall behind countries who are actively in the interest of helping their people and their country succeed, such as China, who are very, very much invested in innovating and creating new technologies and helping other countries and doing certain things that are going to propel their country forward quicker. Another one, finance is less impactful. I don't care what you say. Finance is by far probably one of the least important industries that we focus on in the world. Money in itself is a great concept, but as a whole, money is really just kind of a resource replacement to help facilitate trade a bit easier. It's not an actual development. It's not actual research being done. Money doesn't necessarily give more to society. It's kind of just like a placeholder instead of bartering like we used to. It's now just made the trade and facilitation of trade a lot easier between other countries. So developing this, sure, you're helping people make more money, but more money isn't really what's important for a future in a very well-developed, well-rounded economy. So that's number one. Another one, net negative. If we have less people developing, if we have less people researching as a whole, I don't know who's gonna even think that this is probably better for the world, that less and less innovation and less research is happening. That's obviously not true. That's a bad thing for the world as a whole. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's how it should be, but that's a net negative. Now let's talk about who is leaving. Now we're going to start getting into the actual research backed. The research paper is linked in the description. If you're a nerd, you can read it. But if not, get ready to hear a long video about a very biased topic that I'm very much in favor of. Who is leaving in particular? Postgrads. People with masters, but on the higher spectrum of masters, so more like doctorates and PhDs. They're aged 33 to 45, which is the prime age for people, not just to like invent or something, but that's the prime working age. You would think it's like, oh, 25, 30. No, you're not as experienced. And at around that age, you typically start to see the most productivity, and that's where your earning power is usually the highest, unless you're like some CEO. So people who are in the prime of their working years are leaving STEM to go work for finance firms and, you know, as quants or managers, things like that. And then they're usually coming from senior positions and Ivy League schools. So these are people who are vastly more experienced than the average person in that industry. And they are coming from Ivy League schools. So the best of the best when in terms of education and in terms of productivity. These are the smartest people we have around. These are the people that are leaving. That's not the people we want leaving to go to finance. They are probably the people who are leading the country behind the scenes that we don't see and we don't fully understand. Why are they leaving? Again, another research-backed topic. That's very nuanced because it's very individualistic on a larger scale. It's really hard to predict why these people are leaving, but there's a lot of theories on why. Number one is better pay. On average, if you're leaving from a very high level paid STEM position to a management position in finance, like if you're managing a team of quants or something like that, then you're often going to get a huge pay increase. And with that huge pay increase comes like not just like base pay, but also you get shares, bonuses, and then performance bonuses as well, because you're in a high level management position. So your work is highly influenced by performance. If you perform well, you make a whole bunch of money. If you don't perform well, you're probably already getting better base pay anyway. So next would be finance innovation. Over the years, finance has become a very complicated topic, honestly. It's become probably more advanced than most fields. It's gotten way more innovation than most fields have because of this kind of bump in resources and importance that our society is placing on finance. Is it right? I don't really know. That's not for me to say. But is it happening? Yes, that's irrefutable. It is 100% happening. And people in these roles are now just more required to have more math-intensive skills, which is the next point. Finance has become a lot more math-intensive than it usually has been. And that's because of all the innovation, all the tech, all the fintech that you see, all these companies that are actually making progress in these fields, and all these STEM majors that are leaving, they're advancing the field of finance when they should be advancing the STEM field, but they're advancing the field in finance, making these things more math intensive, which again increases performance, increases innovation, and a very positive feedback loop. Lastly, more upward mobility. It's kind of shown that the STEM majors in these kind of flat, after they start to get to a very high level position in their field, in STEM particularly, their their pay kind of flattens completely because you're working at a firm usually, you're working at a company that isn't necessarily like a tech firm, it isn't necessarily like gonna give you like a lot of bonuses. You're still in a managerial position, but it's not the main focus of your job. You're probably just leading a team of other STEM engineers. And that's completely fine, but you don't get paid necessarily a lot more. But if you're a manager in finance, yes, you do get paid a lot more. Because like I said, you get bonuses, you get shares. There's a lot of equity that is thrown at you for helping other companies expand and become more mobile in general and innovating. There's a lot more reward for innovating in the tech space than the STEM space. So you are able to earn a lot more for doing kind of the same level of work. Next would be, I mean, like I said, it's very, very nuanced, but honestly, a better work-life balance. When you think of finance, I know people don't think of work-life balance, but it is a factor. It is a feature of finance. They don't have the best work-life balance, but oftentimes better than your traditional engineer, which is, it's understandable why people want to leave. You know, you get more money and you don't have to work in such an intensive field. It's more math intensive, but you're just doing the same work for a lot more money. So you probably understand that the work is more valuable to you on an individual level. Next, I'm going to go into what the potential impacts of this economy, of this will have on our economy directly. But first, one last question for you guys. How do you think this trend will actually impact our society? I have my theory, I have my hypothesis, so does this research paper, but honestly, do you think this is that big of a deal? Some people don't care that I've talked to about this, but you let me know what you think. We're going to get into how brain drain affects countries, because I think if our smartest among us are leaving to go to a better paying, higher profitable field, it's not dissimilar to brain drain. So what is brain drain? It's just the migration of highly educated and skilled individuals from one country to another for various reasons. It's not all tied down to one specific reason or one specific topic. It's a very nuanced thing. Why do people leave countries to go to other countries? For a better life. That's very obvious. But better life how? It all depends. It all depends on how you think that life will be better. So this impacts economies in a lot of different ways, if you couldn't tell. The main way that's been studied on how it impacts economies is, one, there's less socioeconomic potential. An economy in general, if it loses all of its doctors, if it loses all of its engineers, if it loses all of its high-producing individuals, it has more roles to fill, and it has less potential overall to try to actually grow and fill these shortages that are in these fields that obviously need to be fulfilled. So, for example, there's an African country, I believe it's Liberia, don't quote me on this, but they have like 2 neurosurgeons in the entire country. That is a huge problem. I'm sure you can guess why it takes forever to get a neurosurgeon over there. If you have a neurological deficiency, you're probably not going to get any help anytime soon. That sucks for people who are in those positions, who are in that country. And that is one of the effects of brain drain. That's how it starts to affect other countries. Another one is less tax revenue. Less highly paid individuals, less highly educated individuals equals less money from those individuals on average. So if you're making less money from those people, then obviously you're not going to have as much tax as you would have if you had highly paid, highly educated individuals. So the country as a whole begins to suffer because of this trend. And that's one of the main points. That's why brain drain is so detrimental to countries and economies. Not just at scale, but by and large, in totality to an entire nation. Why this would happen, why this is so heavily studied, and why this is such a big problem in developing countries. A lot of our engineers come from Africa, they come from India, and they don't typically stay there because it's just a better work-life balance in America. But then that starts to shape the economies of those countries they're leaving from. They lose all their engineers, they lose all their doctors. What's the point of having higher education if no one is seeking it? Next would be loss of human capital. You have less highly paid, highly skilled individuals. Like I said, there's huge gaps in the market, which leads to work shortages. If there's work shortages because there's no field, and if there's no field that exists anymore and there's no leaders in those fields, then there's going to be no one who's going to be seeking these treatments, these specific innovations. And that's bad. I've covered why it's bad already. The last thing I want to mention is that companies may also experience brain drain to others. This is very prevalent in the tech field, like the FANG companies. It's no longer FANG, but the high paid tech companies, they are poaching constantly each other's talent. There's a reason for that. You need to start poaching talent or else you're at risk of falling behind. And you already know in the tech space, falling behind is one of the worst things that can probably happen to you as an individual company. So to prevent this, you need to pay these people higher than their counterparts so you can obviously benefit from these highly educated, highly experienced engineers and highly experienced tech developers so they can come work for your company instead of your competitors. So if this can all happen to countries, to companies, to economies, what is that stopping? Why is that stopping it from happening to whole industries? Like I said, this has been happening since the 1970s, where more and more and more highly educated STEM individuals are going into these fields, usually expecting more pay, better work-life balance, and that's 100% okay. But this is going to start to affect the American economy as a whole, because if we just have a very, very highly developed financial industry and a very underdeveloped manufacturing, which has already kind of been happening, you can see the implications of what starts happening to the economy by and large as we compare to other countries. As you can see, our manufacturing has almost plummeted to zero because we suck at it. You know who's better? China. You know why business owners would rather outsource to China? 1, it's cheaper. 2, they're better. 3, they're quicker. What is that stopping? Why is that stopping that from happening to engineering? To arguably our most important industry. Australia is already starting to do much better with engineering, and the US is kind of stagnating quite a bit. My conclusion is that our best and brightest are being more and more entranced by the perceived benefits of finance. That is not hearsay, that is true. It's a trend, it is happening, and there's no more ignoring it. You can't ignore something like that. That is just something that is happening, and that's something that will probably continue to happen for quite a bit of time. On an individual level, this is fine. But at large scale, this may pose serious issues when it comes to innovation. That is absolutely true. If we stop innovating and our economy stops benefiting from the highly paid, highly educated individuals we are receiving, then overall, we start to lose. This is yet to be studied, but it remains a looming possibility. We don't know what happens if we lose a large portion of our engineering sector. We don't know what happens if we start losing a large portion of our mathematics sector. We don't know what happens. But we can kind of guess, and that guess would start to boil down to there's probably less research and development, which we're already cutting funding for research and development, which is obviously not a good sign. It's kind of a step in the wrong direction if we want to continue to evolve. AI will possibly be the one to take up this gap in the market, which is good and bad. We'll make a lot of large steps in the right direction. We'll likely make a lot of breakthroughs, but then we have no control over our world anymore, and we have no control over what this potentially means for our economy, for our society by and large. This is not something we should be okay with. America has been very confident and very comfortable with being the world's kind of dormant and standard currency. But if that ever changes and we are lacking behind not just manufacturing, not just industrial, but also engineering, science, technology, math, we are in huge trouble if most of our smartest people are still trying to go into finance. Finance is not the most stable industry. It's been studied that it's obviously not the most stable industry, but the younger people are continually thinking finance is a better option. I am one of those people who think that. It's not more dependable, but it's more rewarding. that shouldn't be the notion. We should probably try to entice and keep the engineers in the roles that they are meant to be, in developing and adding to society more than finance does, and in research and developing the world around us. That's pretty much it. If you like what you saw, subscribe, like the video. Thanks.